Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are going back in time to explore the Tang Dynasty.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, it's a period in Chinese history that's often called a golden age.
Right?
We've got some excerpts from the Wikipedia article on the Tang Dynasty to help guide us.
Okay, go.
And I'm really excited to kind of dig into what made this era so important and fascinating.
Yeah, it's a period just packed with stories and, incredible innovations and, all sorts of figures that really made their mark on history.
So let's set the stage first. The Tang Dynasty lasted from 618 to 907 AD.
Wow.
That's almost 300 years. Art and literature and technology were flourishing at this time, and the empire itself was huge and stretched across big parts of Asia.
It's a massive dynasty to cover.
Yeah, I'm already intrigued. Where do we even begin?
Well, to understand the Tang, I think we have to go back to its beginnings. It came out of the decline of the Sui dynasty.
Okay.
And get this, the Lai family, who ended up founding the Tang, were actually officials in the Sui court. Yeah. They saw their chance when the Sui dynasty was weakening, and they took it.
Ah, so it wasn't just about military power. They were smart and knew how to work the system.
Exactly. It was about strategy and understanding power.
And of course, you need military strength too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the Li family had that too. Emperor Gaozu, who started the Tang, had a son Li Shimin, who was an incredible military strategist.
Oh, wow. I love hearing about these legendary military leaders. Were there any battles that really show Li Shimin's skills?
Oh yeah, the Battle of Hulao in 621 AD is a perfect example.
Huh.
Li Shimin was up against a way bigger army led by this warlord Du Jiande.
Oh, no.
I know, right? But Li Shimin won a huge victory. His cavalry charges were so fast and his tactics were so smart that he completely crushed Du Jiande's forces.
So this victory helped the Tang Dynasty solidify its position.
Oh yeah, it's a big turning point.
Yeah.
And it paved the way for Li Shimin to become Emperor Taizong later on. He's considered one of the best Tang rulers.
Okay, so we've got a major victory and a rise to power. This is already a pretty dramatic story. What did Emperor Taizong do once he was in charge? Was it all about expanding the empire?
Taizong's reign was definitely about more than just military conquest. He had those too, but he was also a really good administrator, and he laid the foundation for a strong and prosperous Tang dynasty.
That's interesting. So what were some of his key achievements?
Well, one of the biggest was creating the Tang Code. This was a comprehensive legal code that had influence not just in China, but also in nearby countries.
Well, wait, so this legal code impacted places outside of China? That's pretty amazing. What made it so special?
The Tang Code was well organized and easy to understand. It had laws about everything from crimes to family matters, property taxes, and even how the government should work. It was used as a model for legal systems in places like Vietnam, Korea, and Japan. So you can see how much influence the Tang Dynasty had.
It's an incredible legacy. And speaking of legacies, we can't talk about the Tang Dynasty without mentioning Empress Wu Zetian.
Oh yes, she's a fascinating figure.
Absolutely. She's often called the only legitimate female emperor in Chinese history, which is pretty remarkable. How did she come to power?
Her story is one of ambition and, political strategy. She was a consort to Emperor Gaozong, but she slowly gained more and more power and eventually ruled on her own as Empress Regnant.
Wow, but that must have been a pretty unusual thing, especially in a society that was so male-dominated. How did people react to her rule?
Well, it was definitely controversial.
I can imagine.
Some people saw her as this ruthless woman who would do anything to get ahead,
Right.
but others thought she was a strong and capable leader who brought stability and prosperity to the empire.
Sounds like she was a complex figure.
Oh, absolutely.
Huh?
She definitely challenged the traditional ways of doing things. One thing that really stands out is how she changed the dominance of the Northwestern aristocracy in politics.
Oh, interesting. How did she do that?
Well, she created opportunities for people from different regions and clans. This really changed the political landscape of the Tang Dynasty and had a lasting impact.
So she was breaking down barriers, not just in terms of gender, but also in terms of the established political system. That's really bold. So what happened after her reign?
Well, after Empress Wu died in 705 AD, the Tang Dynasty entered another period of growth and success under Empress Xuanzong.
Okay.
His reign was long, 44 years, and is considered the peak of the Tang Dynasty. There was a lot of economic prosperity, a vibrant culture, and even advancements in social justice.
Social justice during the Tang Dynasty. I'm curious to know more about that. What kind of reforms did Empress Xuanzong put in place?
One really notable reform was the abolition of the death penalty in 747 AD.
Wow, that's incredibly progressive for that time
It
period.
really was. It
Yeah.
shows how much he wanted to make a just and fair society.
Yeah. I bet this period was full of energy and creativity, like a golden age of art and a bustling capital city.
You're exactly right. This was the time of famous poets like Li Bai and Du Fu. Their poems really capture the essence of the Tang Dynasty, and they're still admired today. And the capital city, Chiang, was this incredible cosmopolitan center. It was filled with merchants, scholars, and visitors from all over Asia and beyond.
Wow, Cheyenne must have been an amazing place to be.
It really was a true melting pot of cultures and ideas.
Chingin sounds like it was the place to be a real hub of activity and cultural exchange. But this period of prosperity and progress couldn't last forever, right? What were some of the things that led to the decline of the Tang Dynasty?
Well, like a lot of empires in history, the Tang Dynasty eventually started to face problems both from within and from outside forces. One of the biggest turning points was the An Lushan Rebellion, which started in 755 AD. It was a really destructive conflict that shook the empire to its core.
I've heard of that rebellion, but I don't really know the details. What caused it and what kind of impact did it have?
So An Lushan was a powerful military governor, one of the Jidushis that we talked about earlier. He wanted to take over and started a rebellion against the Tang court.
Ah, okay.
And what's really important to understand is that the Tang Dynasty had become more and more dependent on these regional military governors to keep things in order and defend their borders.
So it sounds like by giving these Judushi all this power, the Tang court kind of accidentally made themselves less stable.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the central government lost control over the outer regions.
Makes sense. So what happened? Did the Anlushan rebellion actually take down the Tang dynasty?
Not right away, but it really hurt them. The rebellion caused a lot of death and destruction. It weakened the central government and basically set the stage for the dynasty's eventual collapse.
So even though they stopped the rebellion, it created a bunch of problems they couldn't really solve. Were there other things that contributed to their decline?
Oh, there were several factors, and they were all connected. One problem was that the equal field system started to fall apart.
And remind me, what was that system again?
Right? So that system was meant to make sure that land was divided fairly among the people.
Okay.
But as time went on, rich landowners started to buy up more and more land, which often meant that poor farmers lost their land.
So basically, the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, which led to social unrest.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a pattern we see throughout history. Economic inequality usually causes instability.
That's definitely true. So this growing gap between the rich and the poor, along with natural disasters like floods and droughts, caused a lot of famine and hardship.
Exactly. And the Tang court struggled to deal with all of this. People started to lose faith in their government's ability to help them.
It's a good reminder that even powerful empires are vulnerable to all sorts of pressures.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get to the final years of the Tang Dynasty, let's take a detour and talk about their amazing cultural achievements. What are some of the things that stand out in terms of art, literature, and culture from this period?
Oh, the Tang Dynasty is famous for its art and literature. It was like a golden age for Chinese poetry with iconic figures like Li Bai and Du Fu. Their poems are still celebrated today.
Oh, I've heard of them, but I've never actually read any of their work. What made their poetry so special?
Well, Li Bai was known for his romantic and whimsical style. He wrote a lot about nature, friendship, and the beauty of life. One of his most famous poems is called Drinking Alone by Moonlight, and it captures this feeling of longing and loneliness that still resonates with people today. There's this one part where he says,
Go on.
"A cup of wine beneath the moon alone. I shadow dance, no partner near raising my cup. I invite the bright moon, for in my shadow there are now three of us."
Wow, that's so beautiful and evocative. There's such a deep sense of yearning in those lines. And what about Du Fu? What was his style like?
Du Fu's poetry was more grounded in social commentary and realism. You know, he actually lived through some really turbulent times, including the Aleutian Rebellion.
Oh, right.
And his poems often reflected the struggles and anxieties of that time. He's been called a poet historian because his work gives us valuable insights into what was going on in Tang society.
So between Li Bai and Du Fu, we get a whole range of human experiences and emotions expressed through their poetry. It's like we have a direct window into the Tang Dynasty through their words. What about other forms of literature? Were there any famous prose writers or storytellers?
Yeah, the Tang Dynasty saw the rise of short stories. One famous example is Ying Ying's biography by Yuan Zhan.
Okay.
It's a story that explores love, societal expectations, and the pressures of Confucian morality. It gives us a peek into the lives of everyday people and the kinds of dilemmas they faced in Tang society.
It's always fascinating to me how stories from so long ago can still be relevant to us today. It seems like certain human experiences and emotions are universal across time and cultures. Speaking of which, let's go back to Chiang, the Tang capital. We talked about it briefly before, but I'd love to hear more about what made it such a vibrant center of cultural exchange.
Oh, Chang'an was truly an international city. It was a testament to the Tang Dynasty's global connections. It was like a giant melting pot with people from all walks of life and from all over the world coming together. You had merchants from Persia and Arabia, Buddhist monks from India, envoys from Korea and Japan. It was a really diverse and dynamic place.
I can only imagine what it must have been like to walk the streets of Chang'an. Did all of this cultural exchange influence Tang fashion and aesthetics?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Tang Dynasty fashion was known for its elegance and sophistication, and you can definitely see the influence of other cultures in everything from clothing styles to hairstyles and accessories.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, for instance, fabrics and patterns inspired by Persian designs became really trendy, and women started to wear elaborate hairstyles decorated with jewels and ornaments.
So even something like fashion shows us how open the Tang Dynasty was to the world and how willing they were to embrace new ideas. It's not at all what I would picture for an isolated and inward-looking empire.
That's a good point. The Tang Dynasty was really connected to the rest of the world through trade diplomacy and cultural exchange. And this openness is reflected not just in their fashion, but also in their religious landscape. Buddhism, which came from India, really flourished in China during the Tang Dynasty and became a major force in society.
I'd love to hear more about that. What was the role of Buddhism like during this period? How did it coexist with other Chinese belief systems like Taoism and Confucianism?
Well, the Tang Dynasty was a time of pretty good religious tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism all existed together, and there was even some mixing of ideas from different beliefs.
Interesting.
Buddhist temples and monasteries were important parts of society. They were not just places for religious practice, but also centers of learning, social welfare, and even economic activity.
So Buddhism wasn't just a spiritual thing, it was woven into the fabric of Tang society. Did this acceptance of Buddhism continue throughout the entire Tang Dynasty?
That's an interesting point. Actually, as the Tang Dynasty started to decline, Buddhism faced more and more opposition, and eventually there was a period of state-sponsored suppression in the mid-9th century.
Wow, really? Why did that happen?
It seems like there were a few reasons. Some people were worried about how much wealth and influence Buddhist institutions had, and there was also a renewed interest in Confucianism and Taoism. So this combination of economic and political factors led to the persecution of Buddhists.
That's a good reminder that even in a dynasty known for its cultural vibrancy and openness, things can change, especially when politics and economics get involved. It sounds like the Tang Dynasty experienced a lot of upheaval, from rebellions to economic challenges and shifting religious dynamics.
Yeah, they definitely did. But amidst all of these challenges, the Tang Dynasty also produced some remarkable technological innovations.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that. Tell me more.
One big one was woodblock printing, which completely revolutionized how knowledge was spread. Imagine how impactful it was to be able to make multiple copies of a text quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, that's huge. Before that, every book had to be copied by hand, which would have taken forever. Woodblock printing must have had a huge effect on literacy and education. What other innovations did the Tang Dynasty come up with?
Another incredible invention from this period was Yi Jing's clockwork escapement mechanism.
Okay, I'm going to need you to explain that one clockwork escapement mechanism. What is that?
You're right, it's a bit complicated, but I'll try to simplify it. Imagine a water wheel that's powering a bunch of gears. The escapement mechanism is like a gate that controls how the energy from the water wheel is transferred to the gears. This created a really precise and regular motion, which allowed Yi Jing to build a clock that actually struck the hours.
A striking clock in the 8th century. That's incredible.
I know, right? It's amazing what Tang Dynasty engineers were able to do. They also made significant advances in cartography, creating detailed maps of the empire and beyond.
Cool. What about medicine?
They made progress in understanding acupuncture and herbal remedies, too. And get this, they even developed early forms of air conditioning.
Wait, air conditioning? Seriously, how did that even work back then?
They used water-powered fan wheels to create a cool breeze. It wasn't like the AC we have today, but it was a pretty ingenious way to deal with the summer heat.
I'm blown away by all of this. It sounds like the Tang Dynasty was a period of incredible creativity and innovation, not just in the arts and culture, but in science and technology, too.
Exactly. The Tang Dynasty's achievements in art, literature, technology, and government are all connected. They show us a society that was confident, open-minded, and ready to take on new ideas and challenges.
It's amazing to think about everything the Tang Dynasty achieved, all those cultural heights and technological breakthroughs. But we know that all good things must eventually come to an end. We talked about some of the reasons why they declined. What were those last few decades like before the Tang Dynasty fell in 907 AD?
Oh, those last decades were a really turbulent time. Think of it like a slow unraveling with rebellions, power struggles, and economic instability just wearing down the empire.
So it wasn't a sudden collapse, but more like a gradual disintegration. Were there any important people or events from this period that stand out?
Yeah, one major event was the Hongqiao Rebellion, which started in 874 AD and lasted for a whole decade. Hongqiao was a rebel leader who managed to gather a huge following and caused a lot of damage to the Tang Dynasty.
Wow, a decade-long rebellion. That must have been a really chaotic time. What kind of lasting impact did this rebellion have?
Well, one major consequence was widespread destruction and economic disruption. Huang Qiao's forces even managed to capture both of the Tang capitals, Chang and Luoyang, which was a big symbolic blow to the dynasty.
Yeah, I can imagine that taking over the capitals would have been devastating, not just for the leaders, but for the people, too. It's like the heart of the empire was attacked.
Exactly. And beyond the immediate damage, the rebellion further weakened the Tang court's authority and made their existing economic problems even worse. It drained their resources and showed everyone how vulnerable they were. They never really recovered from it.
So even though they eventually stopped the Hongqiao rebellion, it basically left them reeling and open to attack. It sounds like it was only a matter of time before someone came along and delivered the final blow, who ultimately ended the Tang Dynasty.
The fall of the Tang really comes down to the ambitions of powerful military leaders who took advantage of the chaos to grab power. Two key figures in this final chapter were Zhu Wen and Li Keqiang.
Wait, those names sound familiar? Didn't they both help the Tang Dynasty put down the Hongqiao rebellion? That seems like a pretty big betrayal to turn on the dynasty you're supposed to be protecting.
It's definitely a complicated story. Li Keqiang, you'll remember, was a Shadowo-Turkic leader who allied with the Tang. He was given the title of Prince of Jin, but in the end it was his rival Zhu Wen who delivered the final blow to the Tang Dynasty.
Zhu Wen. Okay, so who was he and how did he get so powerful?
His story is pretty interesting. He actually started as a salt smuggler, which tells you something about his ambition and resourcefulness. He even fought for the rebel leader Huang Qiao for a while before switching sides and joining the Tang forces.
Wow, talk about a career change. From salt smuggler to potential dynasty ender, that's a pretty big leap.
He was a smart and ambitious guy. Once he joined the Tang forces, he quickly climbed the ranks and became a powerful jidushi, one of those regional military governors. He built up a lot of power and influence, which he eventually used to manipulate the Tang court.
So he basically used his military strength and his political skills to outmaneuver his opponents and become the most powerful person in the empire. What was his goal, though? Was he trying to start a new dynasty?
It seems that way. In 901 AD, he took control of the Tang capital Chang'an and basically held the imperial family hostage. He forced the emperor to move the capital to Luoyang, which gave him even more control.
So he was pulling the strings behind the scenes, ruling through a puppet emperor. What happened next?
In 907 AD, he finally made his move. He got rid of the last Tang emperor and declared himself the emperor of a brand new dynasty, the later Liang. And just like that, the Tang dynasty, after almost 300 years in power, came to an end.
What a dramatic end to such an incredible dynasty. It really shows how even the strongest empires can be brought down by internal conflicts and ambitious people who take advantage of weakness. Is that the end of the story, though? Did the Tang dynasty just disappear completely?
Well, not quite. Even though the Tang dynasty officially ended in 907, its legacy continued. Li Keqiang's son Li Kengshu kept fighting for the Tang cause and eventually established the later Tang dynasty in 923 AD.
Oh, wow. So there was an attempt to bring back the Tang dynasty to recapture some of its former glory. What happened to the later Tang? Did they manage to restore the Tang dynasty to its previous power and influence?
The later Tang didn't last very long. They faced a lot of the same problems that the late Tang dynasty had, like power struggles and economic instability.
Yeah.
They were overthrown in 936 AD, but their existence shows how influential the Tang dynasty really was.
So even though the Tang dynasty itself was gone, its ideas, its innovations, and its cultural impact continued to shape Chinese history and culture. It really speaks to the enduring legacy of this era.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that the Tang dynasty's influence wasn't limited to China. Their art, literature, and technology spread all over East Asia, impacting everything from fashion to philosophy.
Right. We talked about how the Tang Code was used as a model for legal systems in other countries. And their inventions like woodblock printing must have had a huge impact on the spread of knowledge and culture across the region.
Exactly. The Tang dynasty left a lasting mark on the world. Their story is a reminder of ambition, innovation, cultural exchange, and the rise and fall of power.
This deep dive into the Tang Dynasty has been an amazing journey. We covered so much from their beginnings to their cultural and technological achievements, and finally, their decline and fall. I feel like I've learned so much about this important period in history.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. The Tang Dynasty is a fascinating topic. There's always something new to learn. I encourage you to keep exploring their story and see what else you discover.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Tang Dynasty. We hope you enjoyed learning about this incredible era as much as we did. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.